More than 40 years have passed since The Golden Girls first aired, and the people who brought Blanche, Dorothy, Rose, and Sophia to life lived through hidden struggles, quiet tragedies, and endings that longtime fans never fully knew about. One of them appeared in the very first episode of the show, was quietly erased from the story forever, and then vanished for real decades later in a way so strange and lonely that his own family did not know what had happened to him for almost 2 weeks. Another spent years hiding a devastating diagnosis in plain sight, forgetting her own lines on set while the cameras kept rolling and nobody understood why. A third became one of the most beloved women in the history of American television, only to leave this world in the most quietly devastating way possible. Just 17 days before the milestone birthday, the whole country was already celebrating. By 2026, every single woman who once lived in that pink stucco house in Miami is gone. This is the story of how it happened, one golden girl at a time. Before there were 4 women living in that Miami house, there were 5. Almost nobody remembers this today, but the very first episode of The Golden Girls that ever aired featured a 5th housemate entirely. A warm, dry-witted gay cook and housekeeper named Coco, hired by Blanche to help run the household. He was played by an actor named Charles Levin, and he was 36 years old when the pilot was filmed in the spring of 1985. Within weeks, he would be erased from the show completely. Decades later, his real-life ending would be far stranger and far darker than anything the writers ever gave him. Charles Herbert Levin was born on March 12, 1949, in Chicago, Illinois. He built a long, steady career as a working character actor, the kind of face audiences recognized instantly without ever quite placing a name to it. He had a recurring role as Eddie Gregg on the acclaimed drama Hill Street Blues, appeared across a huge range of sitcoms and procedurals including Alice, Night Court, Falcon Crest, Family Ties, Punky Brewster, L.A. Law, Murphy Brown, and NYPD Blue, and later became a small but unforgettable piece of television history as the Mohel in Seinfeld's famous The Briss episode. But it was The Golden Girls pilot that could have changed everything for him. Then NBC President Brandon Tartikoff personally suggested Levin for the role of Coco after seeing his work on Hill Street Blues. According to Levin's own later account, the character was originally written with real depth, a gay man with an actual off-screen love life, one who could talk frankly with the women about dating and heartbreak the same way they did with each other. NBC executives, according to Levin, pushed back hard on that idea. They didn't want any reference to what Coco did outside the house with other men. His only function, as Levin put it years later, was to be within the house, dealing with the women. Whole scenes were quietly stripped out before the pilot even aired. Then came the decision that ended the character for good. Test audiences responded so strongly to Estelle Getty's performance as Sophia, the sharp-tongued Sicilian mother, that the producers decided to promote her from a recurring role to a full-time main cast member. There was no longer room, narratively or budget-wise, for a 5th housemate. Coco was quietly written out after a single episode. Levin himself later connected the timing to something far heavier hanging over the industry that year: the death of Rock Hudson from AIDS-related illness in October 1985, one of the first major American celebrity deaths from the disease. "I think it threw everyone for a loop," Levin said, "especially those in TV. A gay character with an open, unremarked-upon love life had suddenly become, in the eyes of network executives, something to be nervous about." Levin's career continued steadily for more than 3 decades after that quiet exit, and he never seemed to carry any real bitterness about the door that had closed on him so early. He married Catherine DeHeecher in 1983, and the couple raised 3 children together, splitting their time between acting jobs in Los Angeles and a quieter family life away from the industry spotlight. Colleagues who worked with him over the following decades described a dependable, low-drama professional, the kind of actor a production could always count on to show up prepared and deliver a solid supporting turn, without ever demanding the spotlight for himself. In his later years, he settled into a genuinely quiet life in Grants Pass, Oregon, far removed from Hollywood, the kind of low-key retirement that almost nobody watching The Golden Girls pilot back in 1985 would ever have imagined for the man playing Coco. Then, on July 8, 2019, his son reported him missing. Levin, 70 years old, had been in the middle of moving to a new home and had not been heard from since June 28th. Authorities eventually traced his cell phone signal to a remote, unmaintained wilderness road northeast of Selma, Oregon. There, they found his orange Fiat, apparently stuck after he had driven into a stretch of fallen trees and earthen debris. Inside the car was the body of his dog, Boo Boo Bear. Officers had to hike into the area on foot. A day later, they found Levin's own remains at the bottom of a 30-foot embankment, badly decomposed, with signs that scavenging birds had reached the body before searchers could. The county medical examiner ultimately ruled his death accidental. Investigators believe that after becoming hopelessly stuck, Levin left his vehicle on foot, searching for help in the dark and unfamiliar terrain, and fell from the edge of the embankment. He was 70 years old. The man who had played the very first character ever cut from The Golden Girls had, in the strangest and saddest possible way, become one of its most quietly haunting footnotes. He was never one of the 4 women in the opening credits, but for 7 seasons, no man appeared more often, or caused more exasperated eye-rolling than Dorothy's ex-husband, Stan Zbornak. Herb Edelman played him as a lovable disaster, a serial cheater with an unbelievable talent for showing up whenever he needed money, sympathy, or a place to crash. Edelman was 51 years old when the series premiered in September 1985, and behind that comic timing was a genuinely fascinating and unlikely journey to Hollywood. Herbert Edelman was born on November 5, 1933, in Brooklyn, New York, the son of Jewish immigrants from Poland and Ukraine. His path into acting was almost accidental. He originally enrolled at Cornell University, hoping to become a veterinarian, but left after his first year. After a stint in the Army as a radio announcer for Armed Forces Radio, he drifted through Brooklyn College as a theater student before dropping out of that too, working along the way as a hotel manager and a New York City taxicab driver. It was in that cab, of all places, that his life changed. He picked up a fare one night, who turned out to be the director Mike Nichols. That chance encounter helped set him on the path toward a genuine acting career, one that would eventually stretch across 3 decades of American television. Edelman was a towering, gregarious, bald character actor, fluent by his own account in 8 languages, and equally comfortable in comedy and drama. He appeared in the stage and film versions of Neil Simon's Barefoot in the Park and The Odd Couple, played a supporting role in the acclaimed 1973 film The Way We Were, and worked steadily across decades of television, guest spots on shows including Kojak, Cagney and Lacey, Happy Days, Welcome Back, Cotter, Highway to Heaven, and MacGyver. He had already worked alongside B. Arthur once before, on Maude, which made his casting as her exasperating ex-husband on The Golden Girls feel almost inevitable. From 1984 to 1988, he simultaneously held a recurring role on the medical drama St. Elsewhere, and he later appeared in 10 episodes of Murder, She Wrote as a recurring NYPD lieutenant. His personal life carried its own quiet complications. He was married to soap opera actress Louise Sorel from 1964 to 1970, and had 2 daughters from a second relationship. For roughly the last decade of his life, he was in a devoted romantic relationship with his St. Elsewhere co-star, British actress Christina Pickles, though the two never married. Friends and colleagues from that period often described the pairing as an unlikely but genuinely warm one, the loud, larger-than-life New York character actor and the elegant, reserved English actress, together for years without ever making it official on paper. On screen, Edelman's Stan Zbornak became a kind of running joke that never quite stopped being funny, precisely because Edelman refused to play him as a cartoon. Underneath the sleazy one-liners and constant financial disasters, there was a genuine, believable history between Stan and Dorothy, built out of decades of real marriage before the divorce. And it was Edelman's low-key comic timing, honed over 30 years of stage and screen work, that made those flashes of real feeling land as hard as the jokes did. By the mid-1990s, Edelman's health had begun a steady decline. He had struggled for years with emphysema, the same relentless lung disease that quietly ends the careers and lives of so many lifelong smokers of his generation. On July 21, 1996, in Woodland Hills, California, Herb Edelman lost that fight. He was 62 years old. Christina Pickles, who had stayed by his side until the end, was among those who mourned him most publicly. The man who spent 7 seasons playing the ex-husband nobody could quite get rid of had, in the end, quietly and permanently left the stage. Rose Nylund's love life on The Golden Girls produced plenty of comedy, but only one man ever managed to make audiences believe Rose might genuinely find lasting happiness again: the steady, professorial Miles Weber. Harold Gould first appeared on the show in its very first season, playing a different character entirely, before returning years later as Miles, Rose's longest and most serious romantic partner across the show's final seasons. He was already 61 years old when he first stepped into the world of the show, carrying with him one of the most quietly distinguished resumes in the history of American character acting. Harold Vernon Goldstein was born on December 10, 1923, in Schenectady, New York, the son of a postal worker father and a mother who did part-time work for the state health department. He was valedictorian of his high school class, and after 2 years of college enlisted in the United States Army during World War II, seeing combat in France as part of a chemical mortar battalion. He developed trench foot during the fighting and was sent to England to recover before returning to a rail transport unit in France for the remainder of the war. After his discharge, Gould pursued academia rather than Hollywood at first, earning a Ph.D. in theater from Cornell University in 1953 and spending years as a university drama professor, including a professorship at the University of California, Riverside. He did not attempt professional acting full-time until his late 30s. And had to take work as a security guard and part-time acting teacher just to get by in the early years. It was, by any measure, an extraordinarily late and hard-won start to a screen career. Once it began, though, it never really stopped. Gould appeared in more than 300 television shows and 20 feature films across 5 decades, becoming one of Hollywood's most reliable, elegant, well-dressed character men, famously playing the con artist Kid Twist opposite Paul Newman and Robert Redford in The Sting. Television audiences of the era would have recognized him instantly from The Twilight Zone, Hogan's Heroes, Gunsmoke, The Man from UNCLE, and dozens of other classic series, and especially from his beloved role as Martin Morgenstern, father to Valerie Harper's title character, on Rhoda and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. He and his wife Leah Vernon, whom he met while both were graduate students at Cornell, remained married for 60 years, raising 3 children together. Beyond his acting work, Gould never fully let go of the academic instincts that had shaped the first half of his career. He continued lecturing on theater history and craft even at the height of his television fame, and colleagues on set often noted that his approach to a scene felt closer to a professor breaking down a text than a Hollywood actor chasing a laugh line. That patient, deliberate quality is precisely what made Miles Weber so believable as the one man capable of finally matching Rose Nylund's earnestness without ever mocking it. On September 11, 2010, Harold Gould died at his home in Woodland Hills, California, from prostate cancer. He was 86 years old. He was survived by his wife of 60 years and their 3 children. The elegant, gentle presence who had spent his final decades in Hollywood, convincing audiences that a good man in his 60s could still fall in love for the first time all over again, had lived out something remarkably similar in real life, decades earlier, with the woman he stayed married to until the very end. She was the sharpest tongue in a house full of sharp tongues, an elderly Sicilian mother who had supposedly survived a stroke that destroyed her verbal filter entirely. Sophia Petrillo delivered some of the most quoted one-liners in sitcom history. What almost nobody watching in 1985 realized was that the actress playing her, Estelle Getty, was actually 1 year younger than the woman playing her own daughter. She was 62 years old when the show premiered, and behind Sophia's confident zingers was a woman who had spent nearly 40 years fighting for a single real break in show business. Estelle Getty was born Estelle Schur on July 25, 1923, in New York City, to Jewish immigrant parents from Poland. Her father ran a small automotive glass installation business and doubted his daughter could ever make a real living as an actress. For decades, it looked like he was right. Getty worked for years in the New York Yiddish theater circuit and off-Broadway, all while holding down secretarial day jobs to support her family, raising 2 sons with her husband Arthur Edelman, whose surname she borrowed for her stage name. Her real breakthrough did not come until 1982, when she was nearly 60 years old. cast in the original Broadway production of Harvey Fierstein's Torch Song Trilogy, as a role the playwright had written specifically with her in mind. That performance, after 4 decades of struggle, is what finally caught Hollywood's attention and led directly to The Golden Girls 3 years later. To play Sophia, a character meant to be in her 80s, Getty relied on heavy stage makeup, a gray wig, and deliberately age-shuffling body language, since she was, in fact, younger than both Bea Arthur and Betty White, the 2 actresses playing her fellow housemates. She won both an Emmy and a Golden Globe for the role, and went on to reprise Sophia across 4 additional series: Empty Nest, The Golden Palace, Blossom, and Nurses, making her, by some measures, one of the most persistently recurring characters in American television history. But there was something happening behind the scenes that even her closest colleagues did not fully understand until years later. According to Bea Arthur, Getty had already begun struggling seriously to remember her lines during the original run of The Golden Girls in the late 1980s, relying increasingly on cue cards even as her Broadway-trained memory had once been considered flawless. At the time, it was written off as ordinary nerves or fatigue. It was not. In the years that followed, Getty was diagnosed, incorrectly at first, with both Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. The true diagnosis, arrived at only after her retirement from acting in 2001, was dementia with Lewy bodies, a progressive brain disorder that combines cognitive decline with severe physical symptoms. By 2004, according to her surviving castmates, Getty could no longer hold a phone conversation with them, or reliably recognize who they were. Getty's decline unfolded almost entirely outside of public view. She largely stopped making public appearances after 2000. And by the time Lifetime organized a Golden Girls reunion special years later, she was already too ill to take part. Her husband Arthur, who had never fully adjusted to his wife's late career fame and had continued quietly running the family's glass installation business in Florida, died in 2004, leaving Getty to face the final stretch of her illness without the one partner who had known her since long before anyone had ever heard the name Sophia Petrillo. Estelle Getty died at her home in Hollywood on July 22, 2008, just 3 days before what would have been her 85th birthday. She was 84 years old. She was survived by her 2 sons and 2 grandchildren. The woman who spent 40 years being told she would never make it, and who then spent her final years unable to remember the role that finally proved everyone wrong, left behind a headstone at Hollywood Forever Cemetery inscribed simply, "With love and laughter." She was, by design, the most unapologetically sexual woman on 1980s network television, a Southern widow with an insatiable appetite for romance and an endless parade of gentlemen callers. Rue McClanahan played Blanche Devereaux with total commitment, turning what could have been a one-note joke into one of the show's richest characters. She was 51 years old when the series began, already a familiar face to American audiences from an earlier hit sitcom, and her own real life would end up echoing Blanche's romantic chaos in ways that were almost eerie. Eddie Rue McClanahan was born on February 21, 1934, in Healdton, Oklahoma, to a beautician mother and a building contractor father with Irish and Choctaw ancestry on different sides of her family. She graduated cum laude from the University of Tulsa with a degree in theater and German, made her professional stage debut in 1957, and spent over a decade working steadily off-Broadway and eventually on Broadway before television producer Norman Lear discovered her and cast her as Bea Arthur's best friend, Vivian Harmon, on Maude. That earlier partnership with Arthur, along with her recent run alongside Betty White on Mama's Family, put her name near the top of the list when the Golden Girls creative team began casting the show in 1984. Producers originally had McClanahan in mind for the naive Rose and White for the sultry Blanche. But during casting, McClanahan gravitated so strongly toward Blanche that pilot director Jay Sandrich had the 2 women switch roles on the spot, a last-minute swap that Betty White later admitted left her heartsick, since she had no idea yet who the character of Rose even was. McClanahan's own romantic life could have written itself into a Golden Girls script. She was married 6 times. Her 5th marriage, to her own high school sweetheart, lasted less than a year and collapsed just as the first season of The Golden Girls was airing. Her ex-husband later sued her over a share of her Golden Girls earnings and won. her sixth and final marriage, to Mara Wilson beginning in 1997, proved to be her longest and most stable, though the couple had separated shortly before her death. In 2007, she published a candid, funny memoir titled My First 5 Husbands and the Ones Who Got Away, addressing her own turbulent love life with the same frankness Blanche brought to the screen. By her own family's account, one of Rue's deepest lifelong fears was simply being left alone, which she said drove her again and again into new relationships, even when the foundation clearly was not there. Even as her personal life stayed turbulent, McClanahan remained a fiercely committed performer well into her 70s. She returned to Broadway in 2005 to play Madame Morrible in the hit musical Wicked, a role she held for 8 months, and continued appearing in touring productions of shows like Oklahoma and The Sound of Music, long after most actresses her age had retired from the stage entirely. She was also a lifelong, outspoken animal rights advocate and a strict vegetarian, and remained politically active on causes including gay rights and same-sex marriage until the very end of her life. Health problems mounted steadily in her later years. She survived a breast cancer diagnosis in 1997, completing treatment successfully. In November 2009, she underwent triple bypass heart surgery, and while recovering suffered a minor stroke that briefly affected her speech. She appeared to be improving. Betty White told audiences on television that spring that Rue's speech had returned to normal, and a planned gala tribute in her honor was rescheduled with the expectation that she would soon be well enough to attend. Then, on June 3, 2010, Rue McClanahan suffered a massive, fatal stroke and died at New York Presbyterian Hospital, surrounded by her family. She was 76 years old. Betty White, her friend and castmate for nearly 3 decades by that point, said simply that the loss hurts more than I ever thought it would. She was the sharp, dry, exhausted moral center of the entire household, a twice-divorced substitute teacher who somehow had to manage her mother, her roommates, and her own barely suppressed frustration all at once. B. Arthur's deep voice and impeccable comic timing made Dorothy Zbornak an instant television icon, and she was already one of the most respected and recognizable comedy actresses in America when the show began, at 63 years old, thanks to an earlier groundbreaking role that had made her genuinely controversial a decade earlier. Beatrice Arthur was born Bernice Frankel on May 13, 1922, in New York City, and grew up in Maryland, where her parents ran a dress shop. She served in the United States Marine Corps during World War II as a qualified medical technician and typist, an unusually rare distinction for a future Broadway star of her generation. Her stage career began in earnest afterward, and by 1966 she had already won a Tony Award for playing Vera Charles in the original Broadway production of Mame. Her true national breakthrough, however, came in the 1970s as Maude Findlay, the outspoken, unapologetically liberal title character of Maude, a spin-off of All in the Family that directly tackled subjects like abortion, divorce, and alcoholism at a time when almost no sitcom dared to. The role made her both beloved and, for some viewers, deeply divisive, and it won her first Emmy Award in 1977. After Maude ended and a follow-up sitcom quickly failed, Arthur's career entered a quieter period until she was cast as Dorothy in 1985, opposite Rue McClanahan, whom she had already worked alongside for years on Maude, and Estelle Getty, whom she was meeting for the first time. Arthur won a second Emmy for the role in 1988, and by the time she chose to leave the series after its 7th season in 1992, she had already cemented herself as one of the most awarded lead actresses in the history of the Emmys, a distinction she still holds today. Off-screen, she was a lifelong animal rights activist and a genuinely significant supporter of LGBTQ+ causes at a time when few major celebrities spoke publicly on the subject. In her will, she left $300,000 to New York's Ali Forney Center, which provides housing for homeless LGBTQ youth, a gift that eventually helped fund an entire residence built and named in her honor. B. Arthur was married twice, most notably for 28 years, to director Gene Saks, with whom she adopted and raised 2 sons before their divorce in 1978. She never remarried. Colleagues and friends consistently described her off-screen persona as almost the opposite of her television characters in one key respect: privately generous and warm, even as her public image remained defined by that famously deep, deadpan, no-nonsense voice. She kept close, lasting friendships with fellow performers, including Angela Lansbury, whom she had worked alongside in MAME decades earlier, and who later called her a lifelong bosom buddy. In her final years, she continued performing sporadically, including a well-received one-woman stage show and a memorable Emmy-nominated guest turn as Larry David's mother on Curb Your Enthusiasm. On April 25, 2009, B. Arthur died at home, surrounded by her family after a battle with cancer. She was 86 years old. Days later, the marquees of Broadway's entire theater district went dark for 1 full minute in her memory, a tribute typically reserved only for the industry's most towering stage legends. Per her wishes, she was cremated, and her ashes were scattered at a location her family chose to keep private. And finally, her. The sweet, endlessly naive farm girl from fictional St. Olaf, Minnesota, whose rambling small-town stories became one of the show's most beloved running jokes. Betty White's performance as Rose Nylund could easily have been the least memorable of the 4 leads on paper. In her hands, it became one of the most quietly beloved characters in television history. She was 63 years old when the show premiered in September 1985, already a decades-long television veteran, and she would go on to outlive every single one of her 3 co-stars, becoming, in her final years, something rarer than a sitcom star, a genuine national treasure. Betty Marion White was born on January 17, 1922, in Oak Park, Illinois, the only child of a lighting company executive father and a homemaker mother, and grew up mostly in Los Angeles after her family relocated when she was a small child. She began appearing on television in 1949, virtually at the birth of the medium itself, eventually co-creating and starring in the 1950s sitcom Life with Elizabeth, which made her one of the first women in American history to both produce and star in her own television show. Long before The Golden Girls, she had already built one of the defining comedic careers of the era as the deceptively sweet, secretly man-hungry Sue Ann Nivens on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, a role that won her 2 Emmy Awards in the 1970s. White married Password host Alan Ludden in 1963, a union she would later describe as the great love of her life, built out of years of dinner dates that mostly consisted of Ludden picking up a rotisserie chicken on his way home and the 2 of them dancing to old records in a small room behind their house. When Ludden died of stomach cancer in 1981, White never remarried, later telling an interviewer who asked why, "Once you've had the best, who needs the rest?" She raised his 3 children from his previous marriage as her own stepchildren, and decades later, when asked what she hoped God might say to her in heaven, she answered simply that she hoped to hear, "Come on in, Betty, here's Alan." Unlike almost anyone else of her generation, White's fame did not fade as she aged. It accelerated. After The Golden Girls ended, she continued working steadily for another 3 decades, becoming a surprise viral sensation in her late 80s, thanks to a widely loved Snickers Super Bowl commercial and a fan-driven campaign that put her on Saturday Night Live at age 88, where she won yet another Emmy. She went on to headline the sitcom Hot in Cleveland well into her 90s, holds the Guinness World Record for the longest television career of any female entertainer in history, and became, according to some measures, the oldest competitive Grammy Award winner ever. She continued making public appearances and giving interviews well past her 99th birthday, radiating an energy that made her age feel almost beside the point. The end, when it came, arrived with a quiet cruelty that felt almost impossible for someone so widely and genuinely loved. Just weeks before, what the entire country had been openly celebrating for months as her 100th birthday, complete with a planned theatrical documentary and magazine cover stories already printed and ready for release, Betty White suffered a stroke at her Los Angeles home on December 25, 2021. 6 days later, on the morning of December the 31st, 2021, she died peacefully in her sleep. She was 99 years old, just 17 days short of the milestone the whole world had been waiting to celebrate with her. Her agent and close friend Jeff Whitjoss said afterward that White had promised him, only half joking, that she would live to be 100, and that, in the end, she very nearly kept that promise. With her death, the last of the 4 women who once shared that Miami living room, and the very last living connection to the show itself, was gone. There it is, the entire hidden world behind 4 women who spent 7 years pretending to be retirees, sharing cheesecake at a kitchen table late at night. A vanished 5th housemate whose real ending was stranger than fiction. An ex-husband whose comic timing outlasted his lungs. A gentle suitor who did not find real success until his late 30s, and still built one of the most respected careers in Hollywood. A mother figure who spent 40 years being overlooked, only to lose her memory of the role that finally proved her doubters wrong. A Southern belle whose real love life was every bit as chaotic as her characters. A groundbreaking, controversial leading lady, honored by an entire city's darkened marquees. And finally, the sweetest and most beloved of them all, who very nearly, but not quite, made it to 100. By 2026, all of them are gone. But turn on any streaming service, any late-night rerun channel, any classic television app, and that pink Miami house is still right there. The lanai door is still open, and 4 women are still sitting around that kitchen table, waiting for you with a slice of cheesecake and one more story before bed. Tell us in the comments, which of these stories surprised you the most, and which Golden Girl was always your favorite? If you want to keep uncovering the real stories behind the classic shows and the people who created them, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. Every week, we go past the legend and into the life.